2015 Nepal Earthquake. On April 25, 2015, Nepal was struck by a devastating 7.8 magnitude earthquake, its worst in over 80 years. The quake's epicenter was near the village of Bhopal, about 80 kilometers northwest of Kathmandu, but its effects were felt across Nepal, northern India, Bangladesh, and even Tibet. The earthquake was caused by the ongoing collision between the Indian and Eurasian tectonic plates, a process that has created the Himalayas but also makes the region highly earthquake-prone. The initial shock was followed by hundreds of aftershocks, including a major 7.3 magnitude quake on May 12, compounding the destruction. The disaster killed nearly 9,000 people and injured over 22,000. Entire villages were flattened, and centuries-old landmarks in Kathmandu, including UNESCO World Heritage Sites like the Darahara Tower and parts of Durbar Square, were reduced to rubble. In rural areas, landslides buried homes and blocked vital roads, isolating communities and hampering rescue efforts. More than 600,000 structures were destroyed and another 300,000 damaged, leaving millions homeless. Hospitals were overwhelmed, and many survivors were forced to live in makeshift shelters during the monsoon season, increasing the risk of disease outbreaks. The international response was swift, with aid and rescue teams arriving from around the world. However, Nepal's mountainous terrain and damaged infrastructure made relief efforts extremely challenging. In the years since, Nepal has made progress in rebuilding, but recovery has been slow. Many families still struggle with inadequate housing and lost livelihoods. The earthquake also served as a wake-up call for the region, prompting new building codes and greater focus on disaster risk reduction. The 2015 Nepal earthquake remains a stark reminder of the power of nature and the importance of resilience and preparedness in vulnerable regions. 1985 Nevado del Ruiz eruption, Colombia. On November 13, 1985, the Nevado del Ruiz volcano in Colombia erupted after months of seismic activity and minor ash emissions. The volcano, capped by a glacier, had shown warning signs, but many local residents and officials underestimated the threat. When the eruption occurred, it was relatively small in volcanic terms, but it melted the mountain's ice cap, sending massive lahars, fast-moving mud flows, down the slopes. Within hours, these deadly rivers of mud and debris surged into the valleys below, traveling at speeds up to 60 kilometers per hour. The town of Armero, located about 74 kilometers from the volcano, was directly in the path. Most residents were asleep and had little warning. The lahar buried the town under several meters of mud, killing more than 23,000 people, about 3/4 of Armero's population, in a matter of minutes. Other nearby towns were also hit, bringing the total death toll to around 25,000. The disaster was made worse by communication failures and a lack of coordinated emergency response. Warnings from scientists were not effectively relayed to the public, and evacuation orders were delayed or ignored. The tragedy became a symbol of the consequences of poor disaster preparedness. One of the most haunting images from the disaster was that of Omera Sanchez, a young girl trapped in the debris for 3 days before succumbing to her injuries. Her story, broadcast worldwide, highlighted the human cost of the tragedy and the urgent need for better emergency planning. In the aftermath, Colombia and other countries around the world re-examined their volcano monitoring and disaster response systems. The Armero tragedy led to the creation of new early warning protocols and greater investment in scientific monitoring. Today, the 1985 Nevado del Ruiz eruption stands as one of the deadliest volcanic disasters of the 20th century and a stark reminder of the importance of heeding natural warnings and preparing vulnerable communities for the worst. 2005 Hurricane Katrina, USA. In August 2005, Hurricane Katrina became one of the deadliest and most destructive natural disasters in U.S. history. The storm formed over the Bahamas and rapidly intensified in the Gulf of Mexico, reaching Category 5 strength before making landfall as a Category 3 hurricane near New Orleans, Louisiana, on August 29. Katrina brought winds over 125 miles per hour and, more critically, a massive storm surge that overwhelmed New Orleans' levee system. As the levees failed, about 80% of the city flooded, with some neighborhoods submerged under more than 10 feet of water. Tens of thousands of residents were stranded on rooftops or in the Superdome, waiting for rescue as emergency services struggled to respond. The devastation extended beyond New Orleans, with coastal Mississippi and Alabama also suffering catastrophic damage. Entire communities were wiped out and critical infrastructure, roads, hospitals, utilities, was destroyed. In total, more than 1,800 people died and over 1 million were displaced, making it the largest displacement of Americans since the Dust Bowl. Katrina exposed major failures in disaster preparedness and response at all levels of government. Delays in rescue operations, inadequate shelter conditions, and poor coordination led to widespread criticism and a national debate about emergency management, poverty, and race. Economically, Katrina caused over $160 billion in damages, making it the costliest natural disaster in U.S. history at the time. The storm also triggered long-term environmental damage, including the loss of protective wetlands along the Gulf Coast. In the years since, New Orleans has rebuilt much of its infrastructure and improved its levee system, but many neighborhoods and families never fully recovered. Katrina's legacy is a stark reminder of the importance of disaster planning, the vulnerability of coastal cities, and the need for social equity in emergency response. 2011 Tōhoku Earthquake and Tsunami, Japan. On March 11, 2011, Japan was struck by one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded, a magnitude 9.0 quake off the coast of Tōhoku in northeastern Honshu. The quake was caused by the subduction of the Pacific Plate beneath the North American Plate, a region known for intense seismic activity. The earthquake itself caused significant shaking and damage, but the real devastation came minutes later. A massive tsunami, with waves reaching up to 40 meters high, slammed into the coastline. Entire towns and villages were swept away, and the water surged several kilometers inland, destroying everything in its path. The disaster killed nearly 20,000 people, with thousands more missing. Over 500,000 were displaced, and more than 1 million buildings were damaged or destroyed. The tsunami also triggered the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster, as floodwaters disabled the plant's cooling systems, leading to core meltdowns and the release of radioactive material. This became the worst nuclear accident since Chernobyl, forcing mass evacuations and contaminating land and sea. Japan's emergency response was rapid, but the scale of the disaster overwhelmed even the best-prepared nation. International aid poured in, and the Japanese people showed remarkable resilience and solidarity in the face of tragedy. The long-term impact was profound. The disaster led to a nationwide review of disaster preparedness, stricter building codes, and a major shift in Japan's energy policy, with a move away from nuclear power. Many communities along the coast are still rebuilding, and the psychological scars remain deep. The 2011 Tōhoku earthquake and tsunami stand as a stark reminder of nature's power and the importance of readiness, resilience, and community in the aftermath of catastrophe. 2008 Sichuan earthquake, China. On May 12, 2008, a powerful 7.9 magnitude earthquake struck China's Sichuan province, becoming one of the deadliest and most devastating disasters in modern Chinese history. The quake's epicenter was in Wenchuan County, but the tremors were felt across much of China, including major cities like Chengdu and even as far as Beijing and Shanghai. The earthquake was caused by the collision of the Indian and Eurasian tectonic plates, which created immense pressure along the long-mentioned fault. When this pressure was released, it triggered violent ground shaking that lasted nearly 2 minutes. The destruction was catastrophic. Nearly 90,000 people were killed or went missing, and over 370,000 were injured. Entire towns and villages were flattened, and more than 5 million people were left homeless. The quake also caused thousands of landslides, blocked rivers, and created so-called quake lakes, which threatened further flooding. One of the most heartbreaking aspects was the collapse of thousands of school buildings, resulting in the deaths of thousands of children. This led to national outrage and demands for accountability regarding building standards and corruption. China's response was massive and swift. The government mobilized the military, rescue teams, and volunteers, while international aid poured in. Survivors were pulled from the rubble for days, and temporary shelters were set up for millions. In the aftermath, China launched a huge reconstruction effort, rebuilding entire communities and improving infrastructure. The disaster also led to stricter building codes and greater public awareness of earthquake preparedness. The 2008 Sichuan earthquake remains a somber reminder of the power of nature, the importance of resilient infrastructure, and the enduring spirit of communities in the face of tragedy. 1984 Bhopal gas tragedy, India. On the night of December 2, 1984, the world witnessed one of the worst industrial disasters in history in Bhopal, India. At the Union Carbide pesticide plant, a storage tank containing over 40 tons of highly toxic methyl isocyanate, MIC, gas leaked into the air. The leak was triggered by water entering the tank, causing a runaway chemical reaction. Safety systems failed, and the deadly gas spread quickly over the densely populated neighborhoods surrounding the plant. Within hours, thousands of people awoke coughing, choking, and blinded by the gas. Many died in their sleep or as they tried to flee. Official estimates put the immediate death toll at around 3,000, but later studies suggest that up to 15,000 may have died in the following weeks and months due to exposure. Over 500,000 people suffered injuries, including respiratory problems, eye damage, and long-term illnesses. The disaster exposed serious lapses in safety standards, maintenance, and emergency preparedness at the plant. Poor training, cost-cutting, and ignored warnings all contributed to the catastrophe. The response was chaotic, with hospitals overwhelmed and little information available to the public about the gas or how to treat its effects. In the aftermath, Union Carbide paid a $470 million settlement, but many survivors and families of victims felt it was inadequate. Legal battles and demands for justice continued for decades. The site itself remains contaminated, with toxic chemicals still polluting the soil and groundwater, affecting new generations. The Bhopal gas tragedy stands as a grim reminder of the dangers of industrial negligence and the need for strict safety regulations. It led to major changes in chemical safety laws in India and worldwide, but for many in Bhopal, the suffering and fight for justice continue to this day. 1976 Tangshan Earthquake, China. On July 28, 1976, the city of Tangshan in northern China was struck by one of the deadliest earthquakes of the 20th century. At 3:42 a.m., a magnitude 7.5 quake hit without warning, its epicenter directly beneath the industrial city of over 1 million people. The earthquake was caused by movement along the Tangshan Fault, a result of tectonic stress in the region. The shallow depth of the quake, just 12 kilometers below the surface, meant the shaking was especially violent and destructive. In less than a minute, Tangshan was devastated. Buildings, factories, and homes collapsed instantly, trapping thousands. The destruction was nearly total. Over 85% of the city structures were destroyed or severely damaged. The official death toll was put at around 242,000, but some estimates suggest the real number could be much higher. Hundreds of thousands more were injured, and survivors faced days without water, electricity, or medical care. Rescue efforts were hampered by aftershocks, including a powerful 7.1 quake that struck later the same day, causing further destruction and panic. The disaster overwhelmed local resources, and the Chinese government mobilized the military and volunteers for massive rescue and relief operations. The Tangshan earthquake exposed weaknesses in building standards and disaster preparedness. In its aftermath, China reformed its emergency response systems and introduced stricter construction codes to better withstand future quakes. Today, Tangshan has been rebuilt as a symbol of resilience, but the memory of the 1976 earthquake remains a somber reminder of nature's power and the importance of preparedness in earthquake-prone regions. 2004 Indian Ocean Tsunami. On December 26, 2004, the world witnessed one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history. A massive undersea earthquake, measuring 9.1 to 9.3 in magnitude, struck off the coast of Sumatra, Indonesia. The quake was caused by the sudden movement of the Indian tectonic plate beneath the Burma plate, releasing enormous energy and displacing huge volumes of water. Within minutes, a series of powerful tsunamis radiated across the Indian Ocean, reaching speeds of up to 800 kilometers per hour. The waves struck the coasts of Indonesia, Thailand, Sri Lanka, India, the Maldives, and even as far as East Africa. Some waves reached heights of 30 meters, obliterating entire communities. The destruction was catastrophic. Over 230,000 people lost their lives across 14 countries, with Indonesia's Aceh province suffering the highest casualties. Millions were left homeless, and countless families were torn apart. The disaster struck without warning, as there was no regional tsunami alert system in place at the time. The aftermath saw a massive international humanitarian response. Aid agencies, governments, and volunteers mobilized to provide food, water, medical care, and shelter. The tragedy also exposed the vulnerability of coastal populations and the urgent need for early warning systems. In the years that followed, affected countries rebuilt homes, schools, and infrastructure, and a new Indian Ocean tsunami warning system was established to prevent similar loss of life in the future. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami remains a stark reminder of nature's power and the importance of global cooperation and preparedness in the face of disaster. 1970 Bhola Cyclone, Bangladesh. On November 12, 1970, the Bhola cyclone struck what was then East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, and parts of India, becoming the deadliest tropical cyclone in recorded history. The storm formed over the Bay of Bengal and rapidly intensified, making landfall with wind speeds of up to 115 miles per hour. The real devastation came from the massive storm surge, which reached heights of up to 10 meters, over 30 feet, and swept across the low-lying Ganges Delta. Entire villages were submerged, and farmland was inundated with salt water. The cyclone struck at night, catching millions off guard and leaving little time for evacuation. The human toll was staggering. An estimated 300,000 to 500,000 people lost their lives, with many more injured or missing. The destruction of homes, crops, and livestock left millions homeless and created a humanitarian crisis. Relief efforts were hampered by destroyed infrastructure, flooded roads, and a lack of coordination. The disaster exposed severe shortcomings in disaster preparedness and government response. Widespread anger over the slow and inadequate relief efforts fueled political unrest, contributing to the Bangladesh Liberation War and the eventual independence of Bangladesh in 1971. In the aftermath, international aid poured in, and the tragedy led to significant improvements in cyclone warning systems and disaster management in the region. The 1970 Bhola cyclone remains a somber reminder of the vulnerability of coastal populations and the critical importance of early warning and preparedness in saving lives. 1931 China floods. The 1931 China floods are considered the deadliest natural disaster of the 20th century and possibly in all recorded history. Between June and August 1931, a combination of extreme weather events led to catastrophic flooding along China's major rivers, especially the Yangtze, Huai, and Yellow rivers. The disaster was triggered by months of unusually heavy snow in the winter, followed by spring thaws, and then record-breaking rainfall during the summer monsoon. The rivers swelled far beyond their banks, and a series of dikes and levees, many poorly maintained, failed under the pressure. The flooding submerged entire cities, villages, and vast stretches of farmland. Estimates of the death toll vary widely, but most historians agree that between 1 and 4 million people lost their lives, either from drowning, disease, starvation, or subsequent social upheaval. Tens of millions more were displaced, with survivors facing outbreaks of cholera, typhoid, and famine as clean water and food became scarce. The floods destroyed homes, crops, and infrastructure, crippling the region's economy and overwhelming relief efforts. The government and international organizations struggled to provide aid, but the scale of the disaster was unprecedented. In the aftermath, the tragedy exposed the urgent need for better flood control, river management, and disaster preparedness in China. It led to major engineering projects in later decades, including the construction of dams and improved levee systems. The 1931 China floods remain a somber reminder of the devastating power of nature and the importance of investing in resilient infrastructure and emergency planning to protect vulnerable populations. 1983 to 1985 Ethiopian Famine. Between 1983 and 1985, Ethiopia suffered one of the most devastating famines of the 20th century. The crisis was triggered by a combination of severe drought, civil conflict, and government policies that disrupted food production and distribution. The drought struck northern Ethiopia, particularly the provinces of Tigray and Wollo, causing crops to fail and livestock to perish. At the same time, ongoing civil war between the government and rebel groups, as well as forced resettlement and villagization programs, further displaced millions and hindered relief efforts. The government's reluctance to acknowledge the scale of the disaster and its restrictions on aid access made the situation even worse. By 1984, images of starving children and desperate families began to reach the world, largely due to the efforts of journalists and aid workers. The international response was massive. Live Aid concerts and global fundraising campaigns brought in hundreds of millions of dollars in relief. Despite these efforts, the human toll was staggering. An estimated 1 million people died from starvation and disease, and millions more were left malnourished or permanently affected. Entire communities were uprooted, and the social fabric of the country was deeply scarred. The famine exposed the dangers of political mismanagement and the vulnerability of rural populations to both natural and man-made disasters. In its aftermath, Ethiopia and the international community invested in better early warning systems, food security programs, and humanitarian response mechanisms. The 1983 to 1985 Ethiopian famine remains a powerful reminder of the need for timely intervention, transparent governance, and global solidarity in the face of humanitarian crises. 2010 Haiti earthquake. On January 12, 2010, Haiti was struck by a catastrophic 7.0 magnitude earthquake, with its epicenter just 25 kilometers southwest of the capital, Port-au-Prince. The quake lasted less than a minute, but caused massive destruction in a country already struggling with poverty and weak infrastructure. The earthquake was caused by movement along the Inriquillo Planning Garden Fault, where the Caribbean and North American tectonic plates meet. The shallow depth of the quake, just 13 kilometers below the surface, meant the shaking was especially intense. Buildings across Port-au-Prince and surrounding areas collapsed, including homes, schools, hospitals, and the presidential palace. Over 220,000 people were killed, and more than 300,000 were injured. An estimated 1.5 million people were left homeless, forced to live in makeshift camps with little access to clean water, food, or medical care. The disaster overwhelmed Haiti's limited emergency services. International aid agencies and governments responded quickly, but damaged roads, ports, and a main airport made relief efforts extremely difficult. The lack of coordination and the scale of need led to delays and frustration among survivors. In the aftermath, Haiti faced a severe cholera outbreak, further straining the country's fragile health system. Billions of dollars in aid were pledged, but reconstruction was slow, and many people remained in temporary shelters for years. The 2010 Haiti earthquake exposed the dangers of poor urban planning and inadequate building standards in disaster-prone regions. It also highlighted the importance of international solidarity and the challenges of delivering effective aid. The tragedy remains a stark reminder of the vulnerability of the world's poorest communities to natural disasters.